とカメラ強いとカメラ
Hello everyone, I am Zazubaar, and welcome to day 12 of Gamera Palooza. Yes, kids, we have finally reached the end of the 12-film spanning Gamera franchise. It's been a long, epic journey, and I'd like to thank all of you guys for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed the series so far, but we're not quite done, as today we are going to get into the final Gamera film, the only Gamera film released in what we as kaiju fans refer to as the Millennium Series, which is interesting because Godzilla had 6 films in his Millennium Series, and Gamera only has 1. We are going to get into it today, but before we get started, a little history, if you guys wouldn't mind. So, Gamera is currently owned by Katawaka Pictures, a Japanese-based production company who bought out the rights to Dai following the release of the Heisei Gamera trilogy, and going into the early 2000s, they bought all of the remaining assets of Dai, which there weren't many, because Dai was barely a thing in the 90s, with the Heisei series being just having their films distributed by Toho, and bought all of their assets, meaning they got the rights to all of Dai's franchises, which included really 2 main ones that they were really interested in. The first one being the Dimajin Series, which was a series of 3 monster movies in the 1960s that was about a giant statue thing. I haven't seen those movies yet, and I do intend to. I know there's a good Blu-ray out there, so I would like to see those. But of course, their other big franchise was Gamera, and that was the one that Katawaka was really interested in. Though they wanted to bring both Dimajin and Gamera back in the early 2000s, following the very successful 90s Heisei Gamera trilogy, of course, by Shizuke Kaneko, but also following the early 2000s Godzilla series, the Millennium Series, as I just mentioned, and seeing as how Godzilla had just ended and how Gamera seems to like following the Heisei series to begin a new franchise after the previous Godzilla series ended, Katawaka Pictures decided to move forward with a reboot to the Gamera franchise. However, it's kind of interesting because they weren't originally planning on just doing a straight-up reboot. Not that they were planning on doing a sequel to the Heisei series, or at least as far as I know. Originally, they actually approached Toho, who had just distributed the last couple of Gamera movies, about doing a very particular monster movie. They approached Toho in 2005 about doing a crossover between their 2 properties and finally doing what fans had wanted to see for decades and give us Godzilla vs. Gamera on the big screen. And they went forward with a pitch and wanted to do that, thinking that would be the biggest and best way to bring Gamera back. However, Toho was not thrilled about the idea at all. They really had no interest in it, mainly because they had just wrapped up their Godzilla series a year previous, wanting to give him a 10-year rest, which is exactly to the year what they did with the newest Godzilla movie just coming out this year. So they really weren't interested in making another Godzilla movie just as they had ended the franchise. Though I also think part of it is that Godzilla Final Wars kind of bombed at the box office, and that they really weren't that thrilled about doing another Godzilla movie after the last one, which they had spent a lot of money on, didn't do very well. And that's also probably why they decided to give Godzilla a 10-year rest, give him some time to simmer. And that's why they didn't go with Katawaka's plan to do Godzilla vs. Gamera, which sucks because, of course, that would have been awesome, and it would have been even more awesome if they would have brought on Shizuke Kaneko to direct it, seeing as how he had worked on Godzilla, as he had worked on GMK, and, of course, how he had directed the Gamera trilogy. So it really would have been the perfect storm, but they decided not to do it, and thus Katawaka went back to the drawing board and had to come up with something else, and had to reboot Gamera on his own. So what they decided to do was take Gamera in a little bit of a different direction than the Millennium Godzilla series had done, and how the Heisei Gamera trilogy had taken Gamera. As we talked about with my reviews of the Heisei trilogy, it kind of took Gamera back to the drawing board and took some of the bare bones essentials of what Gamera was in the Showa series, and then completely rebuilt it from the ground up and turned it into something a lot more compelling and a lot more serious. Katawaka, with their 2000s Gamera reboot, decided to do something a little different, and decided to be a lot more faithful to the Showa Gamera series than the Heisei series was, and decided to go more in that direction, and return Gamera to those roots, by making a movie aimed more at children than adults, though I'd call this movie more of a family movie than necessarily just a kids movie, and focusing on the friend to all children part of Gamera's character. And thus, kids, that led to the 2006 reboot to the Gamera franchise, Gamera the Brave, put out by Katawaka Pictures in 2006 in Japan. Now, Gamera the Brave is interesting because it's kind of always been on my kaiju wish list of movies I've wanted to own, because even to this day, I don't own a factory disc copy of Gamera the Brave. It's never had an official US release, and is extremely difficult to find in good quality with good quality subtitles on a bunch of websites. Gamera the Brave, a US release. I have no idea why, by the way. I think part of it might be rights issues, because I'm not sure if... Because rights issues certainly affected this movie, because Katawaka bought the rights to what Dai owned of Gamera, which is really interesting because Dai apparently doesn't own all of Gamera. I'm not quite sure how much of Gamera the Katawaka has the rights to. I at least know they have the rights to the character and the design, obviously, but they also have the rights to the Gauss, because the Gauss appear briefly in the beginning of Gamera the Brave. But aside from that, it's missing quite a few things, biggest of which being Gamera's classic roar. Based on what I've heard, Gamera's roar is apparently, at the moment of this review, owned by Toho, and they've owned it for a long time. If you watch Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah from 1991, Gamera's roar is used in that movie as the painful cries of the Godzillasaurus as it's murdered by the US military in World War II. And the reason why they were able to use the roar for the Heisei Gamera trilogy is, again, because those movies were put out by Toho. So Katawaka Pictures was not able to use the classic Gamera roar in Gamera the Brave because Toho owns the rights to that roar, which is partially why I think they originally wanted to do a Godzilla vs. Gamera movie so then they could use the classic roar, but that didn't turn out, so they couldn't use the classic roar and had to go with a stock monster roar. We'll talk about that when we talk about Toto/Gamera. But I just wanted to say that there were some weird rights issues surrounding this movie. But with all that said, let's get into the movie itself. Gamera the Brave is a strange one for me, because it's a movie I was fascinated in seeing when I was younger, because I was really into kaiju movies when this movie came out in Japan, and when I first started reading about it online, and I really, really wanted to see it. I was very, very interested. And I was watching trailers on YouTube and got very, very excited, and was really looking forward to seeing it. I didn't end up seeing it until years later, though, when a good friend of mine, you might know him, Gorzard, actually put out a version of the movie on YouTube. Now, you can't see it now, it's been taken down since then, but I was able to watch it when it was still live, and I finally got to see it in full with the Japanese subtitles, and I got to sit down and watch it. And honestly, I really didn't love it the first time I saw it. It was kind of disappointing because I was really excited to see it because it looked really interesting. The whole thing of Gamera died back in the 1970s and now this is his son. I was really interested. It sounded like a really interesting story. But I just didn't like the way they told it. I thought that it was a little bit... I just thought they kind of wasted what was a really good, interesting idea and just turned it into something that was just kind of dull and flat to me. And I was also really, really distracted by the lack of the roar. The lack of Gamera's roar killed me. I was like, I just can't take this movie seriously as a Gamera movie with that roar. I need the classic Gamera roar to really make this feel authentic. Now, I know there are a couple fan edits out there that reinstate the classic Gamera roar into this movie. I'd love to see them. I'd probably like the movie more. But even then, I just didn't really love it. It just wasn't what I expected it to be, and I just thought it was kind of okay. Thus, I was actually kind of dreading doing this review and rewatching it for this series, not because I was dreading rewatching the movie. I was actually kind of excited about that, but I was actually not very excited about coming on here and reviewing it because I know a lot of people really love this movie. It's one of their favorite Gamera movies. It's by and large critically praised by kaiju fans, and a lot of people love it, and I really didn't, and I was like, oh no, on the last day of Gamera Palooza, I'm going to come on here and shit on a movie that a lot of people love. I was so dreading it. So I put it off, and I finally sat down last night and rewatched Gamera the Brave. And I gotta say, I definitely liked it more on this viewing, and I am not going to come on here and shit on it at all. I like a lot of things about it. Good. But I still don't love it. I'm sorry, guys. This just isn't my kind of movie. This is a family adventure movie. It's not really a monster movie, and it's really not even a Gamera movie, despite the fact that it takes it closer back to the Showa roots. It's not really even about Gamera. It's more of a Son of Gamera movie. It'd kind of be like if somebody made a movie about Minya, Godzilla's son, or if they made a movie as a follow-up to Godzilla vs. Destroya that was all about Junior. It's not really a Godzilla, it wouldn't really be a Godzilla movie, especially if it wasn't a fully grown Junior Godzilla, which I guess he would have been if they would have done that, so I guess it would have been still better, but I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, it just wouldn't feel like a true Godzilla movie to me. And this kind of has that as a Gamera movie. It's not really a Gamera movie. It's a movie that takes place in a universe that's a Gamera universe, but it's more of a Son of Gamera movie. And in that way, looking at it through that perspective, this movie's actually pretty good. It's very well made, it's a well-told story, and it's actually very, very emotional, and a really, really well-made movie. Everything that the movie does, at least in terms of its human story, and in terms of the things that it's mostly focusing on, the relationship between Toto, who is Gamera in this movie, and the main child character, Toru, it's actually really good. But again, this movie, this is something where it's gonna be a little, one of my other more biased reviews. I'm gonna do my best to be objective, and just kind of tell you, this is what this movie does right, this is what it does wrong, in my own opinions, but in terms of my own personal biases, the kind of movies that I like, this just isn't really my bag. I'm not really a big fan of family kids adventure movies. Of course, when I was a kid, I loved them. I was a big fan of the Goonies, of E.T., of stuff like Goosebumps, everything like that I was a big fan of. But nowadays, I have nostalgia for that stuff, but it's just not really the kind of movie that I like. And also, as a Gamera fan, this isn't really my Gamera. I'm a big fan of the Heisei trilogy. I'm a big fan of the mythic, fantastic, larger-than-life hero version of Gamera, which is kind of what's going on here, but I like the darker, more complex nature of the Heisei trilogy. This is more simplistic and really not that well explored. It's more in the background. But again, the movie is doing that on purpose. And I'll get into this when I talk about the story, but again, this movie isn't really made to be a monster movie, and it isn't even really made to be a true Gamera movie. It's made to be a drama about a father and a son, and a relationship between a boy and his giant turtle. It's kind of like Free Willy in that way. It's more about that, and in that way, it's actually really good. But again, that's not really what I was looking for when I saw this movie. And going into it knowing that that's what it was, again, I enjoyed it more. And I was less distracted by the lack of the classic roar and by Toto's design, which I really hated the first time I saw this movie. But I've grown to have more affection for it. But again, it's not my bag, and I'm going to do my best to tell you why it works at what it's trying to do, but I'll also, of course, talk about why it's not my bag and why, ultimately, it's not one of my favorite Gamera movies. So, let's get into that now. And let's talk about the story, of course, as I like to always. This one will be shorter because it's a very, very simple story, which is actually a good thing. But let's outline a brief plot synopsis so we can get into the details. Since of all of the Gamera movies that I've talked about, this is the one that I'm sure a lot of you guys haven't seen. So I'll tell you the important stuff that I'm going to bring up in my review, and then I'm gonna mostly just bring stuff up as I get into my critiques and my praises and my criticisms. So basically, here's how Gamera the Brave goes down. It opens in 1973 with a battle going on between the original Gamera, or who I perceive as the original Gamera in this movie, and a battle between three Gauss. They're fighting outside of a small rural village. And Gamera is unable to defeat the Gauss, who are far faster and apparently stronger than he is, and he's unable to take them down. And in order to save the villagers nearby from being eaten by the Gauss, Gamera decides to self-destruct and blows himself up and blows up all the Gauss. In the village is a small boy named Kosuke Aizawa, who we cut to 33 years later, in 2006, who is now a father of his own and has his own son named Toru, and remembers that day very vividly, as does the entire village. Kosuke and his son Toru, though, are going through hard times of their own. Toru's mother has just died in a car accident, and the movie opens with them visiting her grave, immediately establishing that the two don't have a great father-son relationship and are kind of alien to each other. Kosuke not really understanding his son, and Toru seemingly not really understanding his dad. Which is demonstrated when Kosuke tries to get his son to do some kind of ritual to pay tribute to his mother, but Toru doesn't really believe in the religious stuff that his dad believes in, and doesn't really have any interest in it. And just kind of states very coldly the state of matters, that his mother is dead, and that she's not in heaven looking down on him, she's in this tomb. But we know that he's taking his mother's death very hard. This is the first summer he's going to be going through without her, and he really misses her presence. They were very, very close, as we learn later. So Toru and Kosuke try to go through life as normally as possible. Toru is still trying to be a happy kid, and Kosuke is still trying to run his business. Meanwhile, while Toru is playing with some of his friends, he swims over to a nearby island where he spotted a red glowing light and picks up a small egg that was laying on a glowing red rock. And as he picks up the egg, it hatches into a baby turtle, which Toru is, of course, thrilled about because he wants to keep it as a pet turtle and brings it back to his house, though his dad doesn't like pets and he has to hide him from him. He also brings the red glowing rock because that's weird and might be important. However, things start to go weird immediately. The turtle starts to grow, starts to double in size overnight, and the next morning after Toru's dad comes into the room to clean his room, the turtle starts to fly through the sky, hovering in the air, and freaks the hell out of Toru's neighbor, Mai. Again, Toru is still able to hide the turtle, who he names Toto from his dad, and following him flying, realizes that he probably isn't qualified to deal with this kind of situation and tries to let him go. But the turtle follows him home, and he decides to raise him anyway. But again, Toto keeps doubling in size overnight, and eventually gets so big that they have to move him because it's impossible to hide him anymore. He doesn't really even fit in the house or in Toru's room. They bring him to a house by the beach and keep him in there as he continues to grow. But one day, Toru comes to visit him and discovers that Toto is gone and sends out his friends looking for him but is unable to find him. Meanwhile, we learn that a bunch of shipping disasters have been occurring off the coast of Japan. A bunch of ships have gone down, and apparently it's theorized that an unusual organism, or giant monster, kaiju, has been destroying these boats. But the Japanese government doesn't believe it because it's been a long time since any kind of giant monster has attacked after the death of the first Gamera, and doesn't believe it. But it's true, when a giant T-Rex looking kinda not really Barugan monster called Zetus arrives in Toru's village and just starts to eat people, destroying the village, and is about to eat Toru's dad, who is trying to save a child, when suddenly none other than Toto shows up and rams into Zetus. Toto is now about 8 meters tall, gigantic and is able to fight Zetus, though is still getting his ass kicked because Zetus is bigger than him. Toru is of course shocked and doesn't want Toto to fight him because he doesn't want Toto to die. Earlier in the movie, Mai, having seen Toto fly, proposed to Toru that Toto was a baby Gamera and that he was going to grow into a big monster Gamera. But Toru rejected that idea out of hand, saying that Toto isn't a monster. But apparently he was wrong, as Toto gets into a fight with Zetus and gets his ass kicked. Toto is knocked out, and Zetus advances on Japan, attacking Nagoya. But the military shows up and takes Toto to a military compound somewhere to do tests on him and to do examinations on him, trying to find out if this actually is the son of Gamera. Toru, of course, isn't thrilled with this, and after being evacuated to a refugee camp following the attack by Zetus, takes a train to Nagoya to try and rescue Toto and prevent him from getting in a fight with Zetus. However, Zetus advances on Nagoya, where the military has taken Toto, who they're referring to as Gamera, and is trying to get him to grow larger, which they believe will be possible by the use of some kind of red liquid that is apparently recovered from the site where the first Gamera blew himself up, and starts pumping it into Toto, and over time it increases his size, and they think will increase his power until he's a fully grown Gamera and will be able to kill Zetus. But he doesn't get enough time to grow into a full Gamera, and Zetus destroys the building and tries to kill Toto, who breaks out of his restraints and then fights Zetus, trying to defend the city. Toto is getting his ass kicked, though. None of his powers work, and he's just kind of a big turtle who rams into Zetus and is getting his ass kicked. But Toru makes it to Nagoya, and though his father tries to stop him, is able to get the red rock from earlier to Toto, throw it into his mouth, and Toto gets all the powers of Gamera. He's able to shoot fireballs, fly, and uses both abilities to defeat Zetus by flying around him and firing a fireball right at him, blowing him up, saving the day and fully surmounting himself as a new Gamera, a defender of Japan, and flies off, waiting for the next time when he is needed again. Toru and his father settle their differences, and we ultimately end on a happy ending. So this story is actually really fun and really engaging on a character level and on a story level as a children's fantasy drama. It's kind of reminiscent of E.T. and the Goonies in that it has some good emotional weight, but never really gets overly dramatic and is still a fun, whimsical kid's adventure. The story between Toru and his father is actually really engaging. I was really into that, shockingly, because usually stories like that in a giant monster movie that really don't have anything to do with the monsters tend to be kind of boring and kind of disconnected and feel superfluous, because we all know that this is just filler to wait till the monster. It doesn't feel that way in this movie. Again, this isn't really a monster movie, in that this is the story that's more at the center of the drama of the film as opposed to the monster story, which is both a good thing and a bad thing because it leads to this story really being engaging. You get really into the story of Toru and his dad as you watch these two try to settle their differences and try and overcome this tragedy they've had and try and become a stronger family together. And they use the monster story to do that. The relationship between Toto and Toru ultimately becomes a window to get into a better connection between Toru and his dad, because they both then have this connection to Gamera, which is something I really like. Because Kosuke witnessed Gamera blow himself up back in the 1970s, knows that he's a hero and has a respect for Gamera, having saved him, and then his son then raises a new Gamera to come and defend the world. Kosuke then looks up to his son in that way and thinks that he's done something noble. He doesn't want him to get hurt, though, is the big thing. There's interesting parallels going on between the different characters, and it's really good because it's a very simple story. Not a lot happens in it, but it's really, really engaging. It's almost as engaging as some complex monster stories. And that's really, really impressive to me because, again, it's not really about the monster story, and I was shocked that I wasn't bored with the human story. I actually really, really liked it, and I really liked the characters, but we'll get into that when we talk about them. The bad part of it is that it leads to the monster story not really even being there. The biggest part of the monster story, of course, is the relationship between Toto and Toru. This connection that these two find Both, interestingly enough, having lost a parent, though opposing parents. Toto lost his dad, though he never knew his dad, so doesn't have the emotional weight connection to it that Toru does. And Toru losing his mother, which he does have an emotional connection to. Which is something I find interesting. They both almost come off like they're lost and both looking for a purpose, and kind of find a purpose in each other. Toto gets a great connection to Toru and decides to save the world, protect it, and Toru raises the future protector of the world. That's good stuff. I like that. Problem is, the monster story as it stands is really weak and underdeveloped. It's really not even a story. It's a background piece for this human drama. Which, it just leads to you, again, it leads to it not really feeling like a Gamera movie. And as a Gamera fan, I came here to see a Gamera movie. And I was disappointed to find one that wasn't really about Gamera. It's more about these human characters. Which, again, you don't really mind because you like them. But at the same time, it's a really interesting idea to have a new Gamera born after the last one died. And to have a whole legacy spin on the previously established Gamera mythos. It's kind of interesting because it's kind of a blending of the Showa and Heisei series. Because Gamera's characterization is a lot closer to the Showa series, being the friend to all children, and the overall tone of the film being more of a children's film. And, of course, his origins are left about as ambiguous as they were in the Showa series, but his relationship to the Gauss seems to be more close to the Heisei series. At the beginning, he's fighting multiple Gauss just to protect the world, which is something that the Heisei series started off with Gamera being built to kill the Gauss. So it's kind of an interesting mix, which I find really cool. I just wish that we got to see more of it. I wish we got more of an explanation for where this version of Gamera comes from, where the egg comes from, since obviously Gamera didn't lay his own egg. Unless it's a Godzilla 98 type of deal and he's asexual, but I don't need to know that. But I'd like to know where the egg comes from. Where does the red stone come from? Is there an Atlantean civilization in this continuity that built Gamera? I would presume so, since he has this symbol on his chest that seems like it's a symbol for something that glows when he's about to self-destruct, or in the end when he's about to shoot the fireball. So clearly it means something. I'd just like to know what. And I'd like to know where exactly this version of Gamera comes from, what the red stone is. Again, it must have been built by somebody, and I'd like to know who. And Gamera must have come from somewhere. And the problem is, the monsters in this movie get no origin, so it just feels like they don't get a story. They just feel like these big background plot devices. They're not really plot devices. Again, Toto is very well characterized, and I like his relationship with Toru. But in terms of them in the story, they just don't really have much to do once Toto becomes Gamera. And Zetus is just there to give Gamera something to, or give Toto, rather, something to fight. He's not really a character, and he doesn't get really a story. He just kind of shows up, causes some damage, and Toto fights him. We have no idea where Zetus comes from, and as a monster story, it's very, very weak, because there's really no build-up to Zetus, and we have no idea what exactly the story behind him is. Sure, we get some scenes of some boating disasters, and we don't see the boating disasters, we're just told that they're happening, and we see one scene of a sailor on a life raft, then get taken into the water, and then we see a bunch of blood come up through the water's surface. That's not building up to a monster's reveal. That's the build-up to the build-up. We have no idea what's going on. And then Zetus just randomly shows up in Toru's village with no build-up or explanation whatsoever. It's really annoying because it just leads to the story feeling kind of jagged. It feels like we put so much time and attention into Toru and his dad's story that we just kind of forgot that we had to tell a good monster story as well. It doesn't feel very well connected. It kind of feels like Gamera versus Barugan in that way, in that the monster story just feels kind of underdeveloped so that way we could tell this cool human story, which is very, very problematic and a little bit annoying. And ultimately, why this movie isn't really for me, again, I'm a big monster movie fan, and this movie is a monster movie in terms of it's a movie in a monster movie franchise, but again, it's not about the monsters. It's about the people and about the monsters' like connections to the people. But the problem is that Zetus has no connection to the people, and the story with Toto kind of loses connection to the people after he becomes Gamera. So that's why this movie isn't really for me. It sets up all these interesting ideas, and doesn't really do anything with them. They're just back pieces to this human story. So that's kind of annoying, and ultimately why this movie isn't for me. It's just not my bag. It just doesn't get into these ideas that I would have preferred the movie explore. Again, what would have been really nice is if we would have gotten a balance between this good human drama and between a well-developed, interesting monster story, but we just don't get it. It just doesn't happen. And again, it doesn't so much feel like it was cut out, it just feels like they just never thought of it. They were never like, oh, we have to explain all this stuff and explore it. They were like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if there was more than one Gamera, and if we told a story about the son of Gamera, and if it was lightly connected to this human drama? It just feels very disconnected to me and underdeveloped. So that's a problem in my opinion. But all in all, it's a simple but engaging story, and I think that's what I really like about it, and what impresses me so much about it is that it's very, very simple, but it's well paced, and I never really found myself bored, except towards the middle. It starts to drag after Zetus shows up, because the human story just it starts to develop more slowly, and it just kind of feels like it's all a slow build-up to the final fight, which isn't really that good anyway. We'll talk about that when we get into the monster fights, but it drags a little bit towards the middle, and it kind of leaves you looking at your watch a little bit like, okay, you've kind of wrapped up all these plot lines, now what? You've still got 40 minutes of movie left. So that's a little bit of a problem as well. But overall, a pretty good story. And with that being said, let's get into the characters. In terms of the human cast, it's probably the best thing about this movie. They're very good, very likable, very relatable, and very, very real. They're not necessarily complex like Ayana in Gamera 3, but they're engaging and they really come to life. They really feel like real people, and you get emotionally invested in them enough. And they're fun to follow. So they're honestly the best thing about this movie, because they're so simple. But I just found myself so engaged in what was going on in their day-to-day life that I kind of forgot that I was there to watch a Gamera movie. So that is certainly good and a testament to how good these characters are. I actually really like Toru, and again, I hate kids in Gamera movies traditionally, so I was really shocked at how much I love him. I think he's the second best child character in a Gamera movie, right after Asagi. But since Asagi is a teenager, if we're just looking at strictly children, he's definitely the best and the most well-developed and the most likable. He's just the most real. He strikes a very good balance between being an actual kid and being a caring, empathetic person. He's just so genuine as a child character. He's got emotional baggage, some childhood trauma. He just lost his mother, but he doesn't whine about it. He does his best to be a normal kid, which I find very, very likable and very, very relatable. And he doesn't whine about his mother the whole movie. He never cries about his mother. I think he cries in one scene when Toto is about to die, so it may make sense. And even though he's got a crappy relationship with his dad, he isn't crappy towards his dad. He just lacks a connection there, and he seems to want one and seems to try to work for one even as much as his dad does, but they just lack a point of connection. They don't have that point of connection that they can really get together and form a good father-son bond. But I do really like that he tries, and his dad tries, and they're not mean towards each other. They just don't understand each other. And that's something I really like. And I love Toru's dad. He's fantastic. He's really, really likable. He's a good dad, but he just lacks an understanding of his son, which is something that I think a lot of people can relate to, is they just don't understand their children. And I love that they both have this connection to Gamera. They both seem to, following Toru's discovering of Toto and raising him, they seem to both develop this connection to Gamera, and then they both seem to teach each other something about Gamera, and that's where their connection comes in. Toru looks at Toto as his friend and doesn't want him to become Gamera because he's afraid that he's going to do the same thing that the first Gamera did and blow himself up and die. Because he has a really good line where he says, "Traditionally, monsters fight to the death, and I don't want Toto to die." That's a great line, because Toru has this personal connection to him. Toru's dad looks at monsters a little differently, particularly Gamera. He sees Gamera as this larger-than-life hero. His duty and his desire is to protect people. So while, of course, I'm sure he, feels bad that Gamera sacrificed himself to save people, he looks at that as a noble sacrifice and teaches Toru that sometimes you do have to make a sacrifice to be a hero, and that that's sometimes more important, and that's what they each teach each other about Gamera, is that Kosuke learns from his son that Gamera is a real feeling creature, and that he isn't this larger-than-life, unfeeling hero who doesn't regret sacrificing himself. And that Toru learns that he is a hero ultimately, though, and that he has to let Toto go to become Gamera and to save the world. That's more important than their bond. And that's more important than Toru's own feelings towards Toto. I really, really like that, because it's also like they both teach each other something about themselves. Toru's lesson about learning that he has to let go of Toto, Toru's lesson about that he has to let go of Toto is kind of like what Kosuke has to learn about letting go of Toru. Because he's very, very controlling of him, doesn't want him to go help Toto, which I guess makes sense, obviously, because, you don't want your son in danger. But sometimes you have to let your children go out on their own and make their own mistakes, which is good stuff, and he learns that from his son by his son learning that lesson. And Toru learns about heroism from his father, what it takes, that it takes a lot of good stuff. So I love that. Their bond is fantastic, and their dual character arcs are great as well. They're an absolutely believable father-son relation. They have an absolutely believable father-son relationship, and that they both don't have a great one, but they really want to work hard to make it better. I love that. The only other main character I'd really like to briefly mention is Mai, the girl, who Toru might have a romantic connection with, but I'm not really sure. She's my least favorite character, but she's still pretty good. She's a little bit more uptight and whiny than Toru is, and is a little bit annoying in that way, but she is about to have surgery for something that they don't really specify. So it's kind of understandable. But she still feels like a real kid and is likable, but not as much as Toru and his dad, so that's a problem. They really should have explained what Mai has and why she needs the surgery. Maybe I just missed something. But if you're going to have that as a major point of drama for your character, you have to explain it. Why exactly is it happening, and why does she feel that way about it? They just don't get into it enough, and she's the most underdeveloped and the least likable of the human characters, in my opinion. The rest of the cast is good, too. They're very real, and they are all very, very likable, mainly in the villager cast and the kids. They're all great. They all feel like real people to me, and I enjoy watching their day-to-day lives and the drama in between their day-and-day lives, all reacting to the situation with Toru and Kosuke. So I love that. The only character who I don't like and I don't think fits in this movie is the Japanese cabinet minister dude with the goat glasses dude, as I'm going to call him, because he's constantly removing his glasses and pushing them up. He's a complete dick, and he's more of an asshole cartoon character than a real person. He gets very little screen time, so it's not really a problem, but thank God he got very little screen time, because I fucking hated that guy. And he doesn't get enough screen time or enough interaction with our characters to feel like we really should hate him. He just feels like kind of a character who didn't have to be there. But with that being said about the human cast, let's talk about the monsters. I actually don't have much to say. I'll talk about Zetus first, as I always like to talk about the new monsters. Zetus is okay. Design-wise and characterization-wise, he doesn't get much characterization-wise, but at least design-wise, it's very clear where his design comes from. It's very obvious that he's supposed to be kind of a satirical-ish nod to Godzilla. He looks like a big T-Rex. His introduction is him destroying some boats, which is of course how Godzilla was introduced in the first movie. I like that, and I like that especially since this movie was supposed to be Godzilla vs. Gamera, so I like that they subtly referenced that in Zetus' design and characterization. But he also comes off a lot like a reference to Barugan with the really long tongue and the more lizard-like appearance, which is something that I like. Barugan is one of my favorite Gamera monsters, but I kind of wish he just was Barugan, because I'd have more of a connection to him. As he stands, he's just kind of okay. He just doesn't get much to do, and the fact that he lacks an origin or really a story at all, he doesn't really show up until halfway in, it just kind of feels like, he just feels kind of, he's just kind of generic T-Rex dinosaurian monster. I kind of wish he was Barugan in that way. I mean, I guess the problem would still stand about if you would be disappointed that they had done something like that with Barugan, but I mean, I would have had more of a connection to him. As it stands, he's just kind of okay, and he's just kind of there to be a big evil monster for Gamera or Toto again, to fight. So I wish that he was there. So I wish that he had more not characterization, but I wish he just had more of a story behind him and more personification. He's very, very generic, and I just wish that he had more going on. Design-wise, though, he looks cool. I enjoyed watching him. He looks great, special effects-wise. He has these big frills on his back that, again, make me think that he's supposed to be a big reference to Godzilla. And he's very, very T-Rex-like. In fact, in the plot synopsis for this movie on most sites, he's described as a demonic T-Rex. So, he's certainly interesting. I just wish he had an origin. We have no idea where he comes from, what he is, why he does the things he does, and if he has any connection to Gamera previously. So I really wish that he had that, because it's kind of like, what the fuck is this thing and where did it come from? So that's kind of a problem. But overall, he's just kind of okay. And with that being said, let's talk about Toto himself. Gamera, kind of. The son of Gamera. Let's talk about the creature that's referred to as Gamera in the title of this movie, Toto. I like Toto. I love his connection to Toru. It works really well for the story. It's very, very believable. The story of a boy and his turtle. I don't think I've ever seen that before, so it's certainly good. But Toto, overall, it's a decent take on the Gamera mythos, and it's a good way to reboot Gamera. But Toto just never really feels like Gamera to me. Not even like the son of Gamera. He just kind of feels like a turtle monster that kind of looks like Gamera, so that's kind of disappointing. Especially, again, when I came here to watch Gamera. I wish there was more of a focus on the mythos, because it's really, really interesting. I want to know where that red rock comes from. I want to know where Toto came from. And I just wish that there was more of a focus on the mythos in this movie, rather than just solely exclusively focusing on the human stuff. Again, the human stuff is good, but I really wanted to see more of a focus on the mythos, because it's interesting. I like the premise, and I think that it could have been a really interesting Gamera movie to do a legacy thing with Gamera. And it's a decent take on doing a Gamera origin story, so I just wish that it was more well-developed and a little bit more focused on him. As it stands, he's just kind of there to develop the relationship between Toru and Kosuke. He is absolutely adorable, though, as people have pointed out. He is fucking adorable as shit. Big eyes, he's adorable. So in that way, I guess he's good as well. But I came here for Gamera. I really don't need Gamera to be adorable, even if it is the son of Gamera. He's certainly cuter than Godzilla's son, I'll give him that. But even then, I don't know. I just don't love Toto in this movie. Again, it's a decent way to do Gamera's origin, and design-wise, Toto, I'm not crazy about this Gamera design. I think they took the turtle thing a little bit too far. And he looks a lot better than his dad, though, design-wise. I hate the Gamera design that they use in the opening of this movie. I don't like the tortoise Gamera. I just don't. I didn't need that. Gamera is unique to me, and I think he lost some of his uniqueness in that they just made him look too much like a tortoise, and I don't know. He looks too old, he looks too slow, and he didn't look powerful enough to me, and I thought that was my biggest problem with it. And again, the lack of the roar killed me. I think that the absolute worst thing about this movie for me is the roar. Because I see what they were trying to do. So they couldn't use the classic roar. So they were like, alright, what are we going to do? Do we create something new, or do we make a reference to a popular monster roar? And they decided to go with the reference. They use a very old, classic monster roar that you hear in every monster movie ever. You hear it in a lot of classic dinosaur movies. You hear it in Steven Spielberg's Duel. And you hear it in the 76 King Kong movie. It's a very classic monster roar. Again, I see what they were doing. They couldn't use Gamera's real roar, so they're like, oh, we'll make a cute reference to this classic monster roar. Well done, guys, but it doesn't fucking work, okay? It doesn't fit Toto's design at all. Again, he's a big, lovable turtle thing, and he's adorable. And he doesn't need that growly, monstrous roar. That roar would have worked way better for Zetus. His roar is awful. It drove me absolutely insane rewatching this movie. I couldn't get over it. I was like, guys, that roar, you fucked up. You should have just paid whatever you would have had to pay Toho for the classic Gamera roar, because I just want to strangle the sound mixer of this movie. It makes no sense with Toto's design, and it just really it's very distracting. They should have just, if they couldn't get Gamera's classic roar, they should have just created something new, because it sounds awful and is easily the worst thing about this movie. I fucking hate the roar. Ugh, it's my biggest, I know it's really nitpicky, but it really bothered me, and it really detracts from the overall tone. It just doesn't make sense for this version of Gamera. Ugh! Alright, I'll back off now. But that's really all I have to say about Toto. He's cute, I like his relationship with Toru, but he's just not Gamera to me. And I know he's more the son of Gamera, but again, I came here for Gamera, man, and it's just, he's just not Gamera. So that kind of sucks. But with that being said, let's wrap up, as I always like to do, with the monster fights and the special effects. The monster fights are, they're not great. The fact of the matter is that whenever you have a young monster fighting an older monster, it's never very interesting. Like Minya's fight with Gamera in Godzilla's Revenge, not very good. So, just in that way, they're just not great fights. They're just not very cool to look at. The movie's not really even about the fights, so it's not an enormous problem. So, the fact that they're not very good, it's not a huge issue, but it is certainly distracting. And they're kind of boring, especially since the last fight is really long, so the fact that they're not very good, it just kind of leads you to wishing that it was shorter if they just couldn't get the choreography right, or if the fact that we have a younger monster in this movie as our title character just kind of leads to you just not being able to do a great monster fight. It's just not great, so that kind of sucks as well. But the special effects are great. They're very solid. The suitimation is great. It's pretty seamless. Zetus especially looks amazing. The suit looks great. And Toto as well looks really good. The face is very detailed. The skin texture looks great. The only problem is the monsters move really weird. They just don't move in a natural way, and I think that's the biggest problem with them. Zetus's walk looks very weird to me. Gamera's walk looks weird to me. And overall, Toto looks like crap whenever he's standing up. His head just doesn't look natural to me. It just doesn't look like it's supposed to do that. And he's on four legs for the majority of the movie, but it just doesn't look natural to me, and I wish that they had made it look different. It just doesn't look natural, and it looks kind of crappy. So the biggest problem is the way the monsters move, but the CG integration is pretty good. There's a couple of scenes where the monsters will crash into something and it doesn't look very good. It's clear that they just went into After Effects and put in the ground exploding effect or something. But it doesn't look bad. And there's some really good puppet work earlier in the movie when Toto is the smaller turtle. That looks really, really good, and it's some really good practical effects. And it looks, and making the actual real turtle that they use to portray Toto when he's a baby fly and do some cool facial expressions looks great. It all looks really, really good. So the special effects are pretty solid. Just a couple of weird things with the monsters moving and Toto's design that I'm not crazy about. But overall, pretty solid. So all in all, let's wrap up on Gamera the Brave. Guys, I'm sorry, but this is not my Gamera. It's just not my type of... It's just not the Gamera that I'm really interested in watching, and it's not my type of movie. The mythos overall of doing a legacy thing with Gamera's mythos and character is great. I think that that's a really good place to take the character, and I would have really liked to see it develop. But this isn't a monster movie, it's a children's fantasy adventure, and as that, it's actually very good, but it's just not my type of movie. So, in a biased perspective, I don't love it. It's not my type of movie. I just don't really enjoy it that much. As a Gamera movie, I don't like it that much. It's not really a Gamera movie, so I don't know. I'm sorry, but it's just not my bag. But again, from an objective standpoint, it is a good movie. It works at what it's trying to do for the most part. It's got good characters, a good human story, and it's well told and well made. And overall, it's fun, and if you can see it, I do definitely recommend it, especially as a curiosity piece, because it's weird production-wise. And It's a cool movie and a cool idea. I just wish it was more of a monster movie and more focused on the mythos, because in that way, it's very, very weak. Again, it's more of a children's adventure, and as that, it's very well made, it's good, it's engaging, and it's fun. It's a great movie for kids. I highly recommend it if you've got kids in the house that you want to watch a movie with and you're a Gamera fan. Put this on if you can. It's great for that. It's a great, great kids movie, so I highly recommend it in that way. But for me, if you're more of a fan of the stuff that I like Gamera vs. Barugan or Guardian or Iris, it's not really for our kind of crowd. So I don't know. I know a lot of people out there like it, and I'm probably not going to be very popular for my own personal opinion, but I don't really love this movie. But I do think it's well made, I do think it's good, and I do think that the take on Gamera that's presented, at least premise-wise, is a strong take. And overall, it is better than it is unenjoyable, so I'm actually going to give it a 4 out of 5. Again, I really like that human story. I like the relationship between Toru and Toto. I love Toru and his dad, so I enjoy it, but as a Gamera movie and as a monster movie, it really falls short for me. So again, not really for me. It's just not my type of movie. And, But overall, if you're a Gamera fan, you should definitely check it out. If you got kids in the house, definitely watch it, because I think they'll love the crap out of it. But it's kind of interesting, because if you watch my Godzilla Palooza, and you know the Godzilla series as well as the Gamera series, Godzilla ended on a really, or at least it did back when I did that series. Now, of course, we have 2014, so it's kind of different. But the Godzilla Final Wars is a big, battle-filled, triumphant end of the series, big and bombastic. This is a smaller origin piece, which is kind of interesting that we're ending on opposite notes, which ultimately is kind of fitting, because I opened this series with a question. Why has Gamera lasted as long as Godzilla and King Kong have, and is held in the same iconic standards as those monsters? And I think this series has spoken for the reasons why. Gamera is very unique. He's the bright hero, protector of the innocent version of the giant monster story. He's a completely different quadrant of the monster franchise, of the monster idea, and I really enjoy him in that way. I think that that's why he's lasted. He's just his own beast, and you go to Gamera to look for something brighter. You look for Gamera for hope. He's the last hope, as he was called in Gamera Guardian of the Universe. And you just look to Gamera to have some hope for a bright future. Because whenever you hear that iconic roar, whenever you see that iconic flying saucer flying in, you know that Gamera is coming, and you just feel hopeful, you feel giddy, you know that you're safe, you know that you're secure. You feel warm inside. Because sure, Gamera may not be as historically relevant or as by and large complex as Godzilla and Kong are, but he's a warm, bright force. And I know personally, whenever I watch a Gamera movie, whenever I see that iconic image of Gamera flying towards me or towards the camera, since I know Gamera is not real, and I hear that fantastic roar, I know that I'm safe, and I know that I feel secure. He just makes me feel good. And I know that he makes a lot of you guys out there feel good too. And I think that's why Gamera has lasted. And I hope he'll always be there to defend us from the darkest corners of our world and other worlds. Because Gamera, he's the invincible, he's the friend to all children, the spirit of the earth itself. Gamera is the absolute guardian of the universe. That, kids, will conclude Gamera Palooza, this epic romp through the Gamera franchise. Thank you so much for sticking with me through the whole series. I know I had a blast doing it. I really enjoyed it. I got to see a couple of movies I'd never seen before. I got to analyze a character I haven't had much time to analyze as his own character in the past. I really enjoyed it. I hope you guys enjoyed me rambling about it for 2 weeks. I hope you guys like the series, and I hope you guys continue to stick with me as we review more kaiju movies, as we do more podcasts in the future, and I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching, and for the final time, sayonara, kids.
go, Gamera. Gamera. Gamera is really neat. Gamera is filled with meat. We've been eating Gamera. Shell, teeth, eyes, flames, claws, breath, scales, fun.
Dr. Forrester is kind of a jerk, and Frank is really done too.
We have to take part in these lame experiments.
But do we complain?
No!
No!
Yes!
Huh? So we keep all over the place.
And talk of 1,000 wonderful days.
Everybody now!
Gamera is really sweet.
He is filled with turtle meat.
Now we have commercial sauce.